to today's edition of Tuesday Times Roundtable. Couldn't be a better, more important time today to discuss U.S. relations in the Middle East, and really there couldn't be a more engaged scholar to discuss U.S. relations in the Middle East than our own Charles Perretti, who's right here. Charles is a third-year doctoral candidate in international relations as well as a teaching instructor here at FIU. He focuses on global security and securitization theory. Charles attended the George Washington University's Elliott School for International Relations, and he worked at a number of DC nonprofit positions before coming to Miami for his PhD. On a personal level, I've known Charles for a couple of years, and I can say he's passionate about whatever he does, whether it's tennis or other sports or national security or foreign relations. So I'm glad to welcome Charles Perretti.
Thanks. Thanks, Lori. Afternoon, everybody. I know that it's obligatory to do all the clapping and stuff, so thank you. I appreciate it. Also, I'd like to thank Dr. Landorf as well as Eric Feldman for putting this all together with Global Learning. It's great to be able to be here, to watch you guys enjoy the free food. It is awesome. As a struggling artisan myself, I know how hard food is to come by, so I'm glad you guys are all here. Usually, if we were in a classroom and we were going to have a discussion about the Middle East and contemporary politics and security and American foreign policy and non-Western policy and all these things, I would stand here and I would talk for anywhere from 50 minutes to an hour and a half, and you would either jot down notes or you'd play on Facebook, which I got very good at the Elliott School. And I don't think it's quite as productive as what we really need to do. And really the problem that we have, the fundamental problem we have with dealing with issues in the Middle East. And the first thing, perhaps over everything else, is exactly what I want to do today, which is to have a discussion. The problem that I see and that many scholars, many researchers, and many policy analysts see is a lack of ability to just engage in discussion. There's a lack of discourse. There's a lack of genuine, honest conversation. So I wanted to kind of start that here today. And I've had the pleasure of being able to teach a number of classes with a number of students from all different backgrounds, both desired professional backgrounds, academic backgrounds, cultural backgrounds. So it's definitely given me some insight into things that I haven't thought about that could be an issue with the Middle East. So in talking about why America cares about the Middle East, and when I've talked to some of my students, I've gotten everything from, from the various contemporary issues that we'll talk about today to it's the Illuminati and the New World Order. We've heard all kinds of great things. Lil Wayne is running the United States foreign policy. I've heard all kinds of interesting things. So I kind of wanted to hear from you guys and to start out with a kind of a conversation from you. So if you want to if it's convenient for you to raise your hand, or if we make eye contact and we just kind of smile to each other, what do you think is the primary reason, or one of the primary reasons, why we are in the Middle East today? I saw you immediately like half raise a hand. Did you want to go for it? Your name, I'm sorry? Hi, Mimi. Okay, oil. And for fuel and energy resources. Okay. That has been brought up since the end of World War II. It's been a staple of our policy in the Middle East. That's certainly an important concern. What else? What's some of the other things you guys think are important reasons why we're in the Middle East? 9/11. 9/11. Okay, tell me more. Why do you think we're in the Middle East about 9/11?
Because after 9/11, the government began bombing.
Okay, so invading a country in the Middle East is certainly a cause and a result that is important in terms of our Middle East policy. What else? What are some other things you guys might be interested in? It's hard for me to look around all at once, so definitely make sure to get the hand out. Yes, I'm sorry, Nick.
It's to create a kind of ring around, or a shield to shield kind of the West from the East against Russia. Because Russia trying to expand West, take over, Iran and all that region, going west. So I think the U.S. trying to beat Russia to that area and gain control over some strategic locations.
Sure.
And also is used for it's a passage for oil through the Persian Gulf all the way to.
Sure. So that's great. We'll deconstruct these two things quickly. One, the first thing that you said is he's talking about a political and in some way an economic and in some ways maybe a military, a buffer zone between the West, Western Europe and the United States in particular, and maybe some of the other powers that are moving in that region, such as Russia. Russia is trying to expand its sphere of influence. Iran, obviously, is a concern. And second is a safe conduit for energy resources. That's certainly something else that's important to America's foreign policy in the Middle East. What else? What else are some of the things that you guys think? There's kind of a big one. It's kind of the elephant in the room. Yeah. I'm sorry. Sorry, apologies. Go ahead. No, it's okay. That's the thing I was saying. It's the tiers are kind of strange things. But go ahead. Israel. There's the proverbial elephant in the room. Of course, we have, as Kennedy pointed out, our special relationship with Israel. It certainly makes U.S. politics, both domestic politics and our foreign policy, a very interesting thing. And I'm sorry, you're going to say Israel as well. Okay, well, that's a good start. So we have oil and energy resources. We have Iran and other possible emerging powers. We have Israel, the U.S.'s relationship with Israel, as well as how our domestic politics affect. These are all good things. One of the things that gets left out of these kind of discussions, though, and one of the things I wanted to talk about today is the way that the United States sees itself. We call it a self-image, the way that the United States perceives itself. And one of the problems with our contemporary debate, and this is only going, I tell you, with not only the current political situations, as you've seen in the New York Times articles that you have, with one of our ambassadors and several of our staff being killed, the assaults on our consulates and embassies, I can tell you without a doubt that these issues are only going to grow internationally in terms of the international political security system. But also, let's not forget, we're in the middle of an election campaign, aren't we? And as we get into the debates and as we move forward, I promise you that this is only going to become more divisive. It's going to become much more vitriolic, and the rhetoric is going to get much sharper. But one of the things, let's see if we can get that to do its thing. One of the things that we want to talk about is we're getting a lot of discourse right now in the media about the attacks on on American consulates and the protests from Egypt to Yemen and Libya, issues with Syria. There's all these things, and they're being very well conflated, I would think. But this is a great, Google went through and did the legwork for me because I am very lazy and busy, but also lazy. And they went through and put together a point map of all the places where there's been attacks or protests, engagements against U.S. positions abroad. And as you can see, there is a lot of unrest right now, not just in the Middle East, but abroad. And we look at this map, it's expansive. From Bangladesh to across the Middle East, even into Western Europe, our allies in Western Europe, both ideologically, politically, and economically. So there's certainly something that's happening here that maybe encompasses a lot of the things that you guys talked about. First and foremost, let's make sure that we understand what is the actual position of America, of contemporary American policy. And here's the 3 points. Now, I know that when you put things on a projection screen, people will just invariably start to read them. So anything I say for the next minute and a half may be lost in translation. But if you go with me one at a time, the first thing is that the United States opposes violence and the repression against peoples in any region, in any state, in any country across the world. This is directly from the U.S. Foreign Policy archive of the State Department's website, which was updated this morning. I even had to change it because they tinker with the language all the time, which is a whole other conversation about how the State Department works, but which I'll be happy to have with any of you afterwards with my limited knowledge on that. But the first thing is that we oppose violence, which sounds great. It sounds wonderful, doesn't it? Second thing is that we support the universal set of human rights, all of the things that are listed up there, which you can skim instead of me reading them to you. And then the third thing is that we support political and economic change in the Middle East and North Africa as it meets the legitimate aspirations of the people in the region. I wanted to fixate on that third one because that's very, it seems very self-evident, and yet it's also, if we unpack it, there's a lot of things going on. So I'd say with these 3 points, Do you guys think, do any of you either agree or disagree, or do you see problems moving forward with these 3 policy points? Yes, and I'm sorry, your name?
Juliet.
Juliet? Go ahead.
When you mentioned the universal rights, how do you know they're universal?
We have a critical theorist in the room, along with some of my doctoral cohorts who are here. Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And in fact, I'll even let you. Would you like to speak more about that? Because I could pander about this for hours, but go ahead.
I'll thank you.
Oh, thank you. What she's talking about, and correct at any point, stop me if I misrepresent your position. But when we as Americans, when our policy department says universal rights, her question is, well, what are we talking about? Whose universal rights? What makes them universal? Whose rights are they? In some cultures, in some regions, in some states, in some communities, what's universal to one group of people isn't necessarily universal to everyone else. For instance, here in the United States, there are certain things that are very particular to us that we expect. We expect that when a police officer pulls us over, that he tells us why he pulled us over, because that's something that's a privilege of driving. It's a right. It's your right as a citizen to be informed, for the most part, why you're being detained. There are other countries, there are other places, even other communities in the United States where, and I know this from having traveled through Texas. Let me tell you, Texas is a very different place than much of the rest of the United States.
It has all that petroleum.
It's got to be all the oil. It's got to be all the oil. Texas. My mom's husband is a 23-year veteran of the El Paso Police Force, and I can tell you, when you drive through Texas, if you get stopped by a police officer, you'll either have an incredible, wonderful story about somebody who went to go drinking with you, or you're going to be arrested and you won't know why, and your car will be impounded, and you'll have no idea what's happening. There are certain communities, even within our own country, within our own states, where what we expect, that universality, that expectation, is different. Sometimes it's different, on one hand, because the community agrees. In El Paso, the community agrees that for their safety, they give their police officers a lot more leeway than what you would see here in Miami, flesh-eating zombies and all that aside. At the same time, we see that in some communities, like in El Paso, it's both the people on one hand and the institution, the government itself. The police force says, we are going to act in this way. The community acquiesces, and everyone seems happy. So I think what you're getting at with universality is when we want to go into Afghanistan and in Iraq and say, democratic voting is a good thing. You should have it. Here it is. Is that really a universal right? Is that something they're interested in? Is that a privilege? Yeah.
From the little I know of U.S. policy, I would assume that the universal rights are referring to those rights encoded in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in which all countries have voluntarily signed on to.
Exactly.
Except Cuba.
Yeah, except Cuba. Yeah, the Declaration of Human Rights generally reflects, and that's exactly right, it generally reflects what the State Department is talking about when they talk about universal rights. Except in cases like Guantanamo Bay, where we kind of do our own thing. Except in cases of international detainment, which is illegal. It's where you take an individual and you send them to another country so that they can have the country's laws apply instead of your own. We did that immediately following the invasion of Iraq. We took a lot of detainees and moved them to the Ukraine, where the laws are very, very different than they are in the United States. Waterboarding is kind of on the tame side of some of the things that they do to people who they believe are a danger. But I'll keep this moving. What are some of the other things that you guys think when you see these 3 policy points? Yeah. Your name, I'm sorry? Beep, how you doing?
Regarding the first point, it sounds fine.
Can you make sure to speak up?
Regarding the first point, it sounds fine opposing the use of violence and repression against the people of the region. But while doing so, does US make sure that it doesn't use violence and repression itself?
Sure. I couldn't agree with you more. One of the things that's been brought up time and time again is, we're glad that you're against violence and repression, but invading a sovereign country sure doesn't sound like the opposite of violence and oppression. That's an argument that some people have made. I'm going to try not to make any real arguments myself, but that's a great point. Anything else? I saw another hand. Yes?
And I know that you said things in regards to about this, but to me, kind of the coming out is on the third point, the use of the term legitimate aspirations of the people. Legitimate according to him, because, the one thing I'm thinking of is in Egypt, for example, with the election of, these Islamist candidates and stuff, that's, there's people in the United States that would say that that's not really the legitimate aspirations of the people of Egypt, but they elected this person. So, legitimate according to
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. We saw during the Cold War, the United States had a habit of supporting democracy, of supporting the robustness of liberal democracies, except where the elected official didn't meet our standards of legitimacy, where we would just kind of use some of our various international instruments, usually namely the CIA, and kind of depose democratically elected leaders because we didn't agree necessarily with their policies. The U.S. has certainly made strides to move away from those kind of things moving forward, but even regardless of U.S. policy, your point is well taken. Who gets to decide what's legitimate? Who gets to decide where legitimacy lies? And so this brings us to the kind of the crux of today's discussion, which is why does the United States care about being in the Middle East? So here's a couple of important things that we kind of need to know in order to, I think, to make a value judgment about why the United States is in the Middle East. The first point is that the United States was doing counterterrorism a very long time before 9/11. We've actually been engaging in it for quite a long time. If you go back even to into the 70s, even into the 60s, this has been going on for a long time. This is nothing new. So again, by the way, we'll stay with me. We'll go point by point together. I know that this is my fault for doing this, but second, American relations in the Middle East have not always been bad. That's a common misconception, something I wanted to dispel today. The United States, for a majority of the time we've been a country, our relationships with the Muslim, Arab, and I distinguish between both the Muslim and the Arab countries in the Middle East, were actually really good. In fact, all up until the end of World War II, the United States was seen as there's much scholarship on this coming from a variety of places. The United States was regarded as a respected and an upstanding member of the international community, and even, in some cases, an ally of countries in the Middle East.
But that they were under a colonial regime at the time.
Yeah, exactly. Even whether there were opposition groups that were under colonial regime, and even countries that weren't under colonial power, viewed the United States as a respected entity in the international community and as a respectable actor. The Treaty of Tripoli in 1797 is looked on a lot. A lot of American scholars look to it, and a lot of theologians look to it because there's a reference in there about how the U.S. respects all countries. America is not, it says explicitly, America is not a Christian nation. We are a nation tolerant of all peoples, and we would never impose our Christianity on anyone else. And the Treaty of Tripoli gets tossed around a lot about in those terms. But what a lot of people lose is the fact that a lot of the countries that signed on to it as signatories, supporting it in the Middle East, were doing so because they liked the United States. The biggest reason why we were seen as a respected entity in the Middle East was because we didn't do the colonial things that were going on. The French and the English were carving up the Middle East while we, and to be fair, weren't strong enough and really had no inclination to do so. So that's very important. Next, the first interactions were mostly with missionaries in Lebanon, and while the missionaries were very unsuccessful in trying to convert Muslims to Christianity, which was their goal, they did gain a lot of respect in the communities by opening schools, clinics, and general areas of worship. There was a very strong positive opinion of the United States in the Middle East on and off for the first 150 years that we were there. Policy shifted after World War II, though. Things changed. Point 4. Things became a lot different as the U.S. made it our primary strategic interest to be in the Middle East. And when you start referring to the Middle East as a prize, that's when things started to really change. After World War II, also, again, as we mentioned, Israel, the elephant in the room, the support of Israel, how everything unfolded with Israel outside of United States policy became problematic. So that's my end of my five good minutes of things that we should probably know. So that being said, I wanted to ask you guys, the first point, perhaps the most important thing that most people look to, is our relationship with the State of Israel. So I'd like to open the floor if you guys would like to talk about that. What do you think contemporarily, in this moment, right now, is happening with our relationship with Israel, and how is it affecting U.S. policy? Why is it that we care so much about Israel and, by extension, the Middle East? Yes. And I'm sorry, your name?
Ashley,
Hi.
I know that we're very much involved with Israel because it is, I guess to an extent, because it's it is more of a Christian and / Jewish state. So I know there's a big influence there with that. And because I know that because it's surrounded by mainly Muslim and Arab countries, that it is sort of kind of on its own in the Middle East. So I think that we have, if the other countries that or terrorist organizations like Al Qaeda, they're after them, in a sense we kind of help protect them so that not a huge religious war breaks out. I know this might be one aspect about it in Israel.
Okay, well you said one aspect, but there's actually a lot of things to kind of unpack there. There's a lot of bits and pieces. But I'll let you guys kind of stir this pot a little bit. Yeah, go ahead.
I think
just make sure to speak up, because if you guys can't hear, just throw something or yell, throw something at me. Don't throw something at him. Your name? I'm sorry.
Randy.
Randy, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add what she was saying. That special relationship. I just want to add that I feel, in my opinion, it kind of hinders our relationships with the Muslim growth, and I think it's more of it's more of a burden having this relationship with Israel than a benefit to us.
Okay, so you take a slightly different approach. You said because Ashley, you had said part of the reason why we're in the Middle East is to support and help protect Israel, who is surrounded by classically belligerent neighbors for the most part. Although let's be honest, there's been a great deal more peace between Israel and its neighboring countries now than there has been in a long time. Whether it be Lebanon, whether it be Egypt, there's certainly much more stability there than we saw 30 years ago. But you're saying, and again, your name?
Randy.
Randy's saying, wait, that's fine that we're there because of that, but it's actually a hindrance to us. And when you say a hindrance with our other relationships in the Middle East, do you then think that we should have other relationships in the Middle East?
Of course. Yeah, we do have. What I'm saying is that I feel like our relationship with Israel is kind of making us biased, and kind of when we have to decide between a situation with Iran or Israel, like we kind of go on Israel's side more than having more of a fair treatment to both sides. So I feel like
okay. There's a couple of things in there that are interesting, but fair enough. That's a good point. Is that it does. If you have a particular interest and a support of one group, it can make it difficult if there's opposition with other groups to engage them properly. Yeah, you've been waiting. I forgot your name.
Rami.
Rami?
First of all, since Israel is a Jewish nation, and I say there's a big percentage of the corporations in the United States and worldwide are run by Jewish people, which is, personally, I believe they own over 60-70% of the worldwide money.
So we have another Illuminati conspiracy.
No, it's not Illuminati. It's true. You know, if you Google it, you're gonna find the richest people in the United States are Jewish. You know, and not only that, the Jewish community is very tied together. If they decided to withdraw their money from the streets from the United States, withdraw all the money, all corporations move their location from the United States to somewhere else like Russia, Germany, our economy will get destroyed. And our country, the United States, is built on economy and built on money. So if they take their money out, I don't think they have enough money.
There's a lot of things in there, but I'll see if anybody else would like to respond. Do you think that it's, would anyone like to respond? Would anybody like any open floor comments? Go ahead.
As far as kind of, it's not on the same level as what you're saying, but I think that kind of an important thing as far as why the United States is so heavily involved, specifically with Israel, has a lot to do with U.S. and domestic politics. The Israel/Jewish lobby is quite large.
It's the largest lobby in the United States by most measures.
Yeah.
Which doesn't necessarily mean anything more than it is just a large lobby. But go ahead.
Also, conservative Christianity also is quite a large lobby, and they tend to be very supportive of Israel for reasons that some people may find to be questionable at their root. I think that I saw it, don't judge me, but it was on the Daily Show like maybe 5 or 10 years ago. Madeleine Albright said to Jon Stewart that it's unacceptable for us to have one foreign policy based on basically the apocalypse happening, which is what a lot of these people want ultimately.
Right. Okay. Yeah. This is something I really want to make sure that we unpack. This is something that's very important because there's a lot of little things in which there's a lot of nuance in what she just said. For those who don't know, the classic Christian biblical tradition says, and it's kind of the bridge point is Revelations in the Bible that says, look, those who stand against Israel and the state of my people will eventually be destroyed when the rapture and the apocalypse comes, and all kinds of things that follow from there. President Bush perpetuated some of these things when he talked about going into the Middle East for a holy war and on crusade and using some of that language. And this is something I really want to key on. This is something I think is incredibly important. Something that gets lost in why we're in the Middle East is that language matters. The things that we say, the way that we say them, and the things that we do are very important. And the article, one of the articles you have in front of you today about the anti-Muslim film, that is incredibly important to why it is not the only reason why these protests are happening right now today as we sit here, but it is incredibly important because the Muslim community, the Muslim world in and outside of the Middle East feels that the United States, the Western world, the Christian, the Jewish foundations do not treat them with any respect and do not respect their culture, their values, and their heritage. Whether that's true or not, again, I'm not making any judgments here. I'm just saying, if I was a Muslim, I think I would be pretty annoyed. I don't know how many of you have seen that, have seen the anti-Muslim video, or have heard about it and it's gone through. Yeah, it's pretty much most everyone. Has anybody seen it? Has anyone watched it? What did you think?
Most of it I skimmed over because there are some things I just didn't want to watch. But in general, it was mostly a parody of Muhammad and about his life and about Muslim values. For example, they make a statement of Muhammad acting like someone who's not intelligent and someone who just likes to sleep.
Okay, so yeah, portraying the fundamental cornerstone of someone's religion as a pedophile, a womanizer, and someone who is intellectually deficient or clinically retarded, that's probably not going to win you any friends. And by that I mean it's probably going to lead to some problems. And the thing is that it goes beyond a cultural issue, and it becomes a cross-cultural issue because people, and I thank you, I appreciate you being able to pretty succinctly articulate the premise of this video. People in the Muslim world feel that it's not that the American people or the British people or the French people or the German people agree with that. It's that they think that our government agrees with that. They think that our government believes the things that are put forward in that video. They believe that our government doesn't respect their people, their culture, their governments, and their way of life. You add the invasion of Afghanistan, the invasion of Iraq, you add a lot of these little things, the nuances, the last 50 years of U.S., American, and Middle Eastern politics. It's perpetuating a narrative in the Middle East, a story in the Middle East, that Americans and the American government, as well as the rest of the Western liberal world, doesn't respect the Middle East. And if we feel disrespected all the time, look at the Occupy movement. That's just about money and derivatives and exchanges and all kinds of things in the economic market. Imagine if someone attacked your actual principal foundation as a human being, the thing that culturally and intellectually makes you who you are. That's not going to win you very many friends. And again, it's not saying that it's a justification. It's merely a point of fact. And we're going to get back to Israel in a second. Go ahead.
Okay,
Keep it short, though. We got to keep moving.
Okay, I got 2 points.
Quick points.
the movie was very amateur. I think it was made in someone's backyard because it was a green screen and there was a lot of voiceover, so it's not a professional kind of Hollywood movie.
Sure.
First point. Second point, the largest religion in the world is Christianity. And I see a lot of Christians, you know, in the movies, cartoons, they make fun of Jesus. And I've seen that nobody came out, you know, not the Pope or the Catholics or the Christian came out and, you know, say something about it.
Well, that's a good point, and I think that's a fair point. The difference is that, and this gets a little bit more into a religious discussion that I'd love to have with you later. There's a much different understanding of the visualization of the Prophet Muhammad than there is of Jesus. Jesus, they're both the cornerstones of their respective faiths, but you don't idolatrize the Prophet. Just like in Judaism, there are no idols. You don't have pictures of Moses or statues of Abraham. It is the cornerstone of the religion in terms of Islam that Muhammad is this central figure that is not to be eviscerated in that way, to be visualized. You're not even supposed to visualize him. You're not even supposed to conceptualize him in any kind of pictographic or any kind of ideologue way. So that's certainly, it's a little bit different, but your point is well taken. There's these communities and these cultures look at these things respectively differently. Yes?
I also have a couple of points.
Okay, keep them short. We got to keep moving.
I it's about U.S. interest in Israel. So
Okay, good. I wanted to shift back to that
Yeah.
too. So that's good.
So I wonder if I call it a sympathy or support dates back to the World War II or the Nazi atrocities on Jewish people. So that was a humanistic point of view. Coming back to present, I have been in US for a very short, little more than 1 year. But what I have seen among like some of my Christian friends, I am a Hindu from India, is that they visualize Hinduism or Jewish religion as kind of very nice and very good philosophies, and they kind of respect them. But they visualize, I don't mean to offend anybody, but many of them I have seen, they seem to visualize Islam as kind of a very dangerous, very aggressive, and something like that. So I was wondering if that has something to do with this, that since it is surrounded by Muslim countries, as she said. So
Sure.
that needs to be protected.
I'm really glad that you brought that up, because that's part of the American self-image. The way we view ourselves is reflecting on the way that we deal with the Middle East. And this is something, and I'm hoping I can also draw in the other half of the room, because you guys have been very quiet and you've been very good listeners. But does that mean there's a question? Yes. Go ahead. Yeah, you have to like yell or wave and.
Is there a statistic on what religion is the largest religion in the world?
Yeah. Christianity as a it goes Christianity, Islam, and then I think Hinduism is third, right?
Yeah.
Because
Is Judaism second?
No.
Say again? Yeah, Judaism is actually very, 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 very far down the ladder in terms of actual number of people who say that they practice. But Christianity and of course Islam follow second, with 1 billion. I think
$1 billion and 6 million. It's economy.
Yeah, I was going to say it just passed 1.5 billion. There are more people in Indonesia that are Muslim than there are people that are Jewish all over the world, by several multiplicative margins. It's pretty expansive. In the United States, of course, it's also Christianity by a far margin. Although those numbers are becoming increasingly hard to carry, because people say, well, my parents were Christian, I consider myself religious or spiritual. I'm sure you guys hear that all the time. I'm sure many of you probably say that to your friends as well. But I wanted to key in on that one thing that you said. Something has happened in America where I think that you had a question.
No, I have something. I'll wait till you're done.
No. This is about all of us, so feel free.
Well, just because what you were saying, I think that we've just mistaken a lot of our cultural point of views and stuff like that. I mean, there's too many variables come into play, but the fact is this country was ruled by a constitution that was written for a reason. Like, that's the whole idea, right? Was that we're based off. And I think we're forgetting that, and we're placing too much value on our own cultural, religious, whatever, any kind of more personal, subjective point of view, putting our values out there, and that's kind of what's creating this issue. is that it's becoming a personal game as opposed to something that's based off the Constitution. You know,
Well, I agree.
It's supposed to be rooted in that. So I think that much of the issues come from that. It's just it's becoming too personal and subjective.
Well, I think that what somebody might counter that with, what somebody may argue, and particularly I think having looked at the conventions recently, the Republican and Democratic national conventions have been very good for this conversation. I think Republicans would say to you, the Constitution is our values. Our values are the Constitution. Anybody who disagrees with that is not American.
Right, but that's not
Which is what they've, of course, which is what the RNC said of the president. They said that the president, they've questioned, they haven't said outright, but they've questioned that if the president is truly an American because he doesn't believe in the constitutional values that you're saying. So, but the only thing I would ask you is how do we then reconcile the values that are supposed to be based on the Constitution with what the Constitution actually is? It's a document. So how does it become?
That's the issue, right? Is that, you know, we say one thing and we call it another thing, and it's not really the thing we're talking about. So yeah, we believe the Constitution and we put value on that, but it's not really what's in there. And I think part of the big issue is that most people are ignorant of what it actually says. I mean,
Well, I would.
And then there's interpretation and stuff like that. So I mean,
Sure, I would even go more broadly and say that I think what you might have been getting at, Dev, is that we kind of lack a general understanding of even what we're talking about. We lack a general understanding of when we're talking about Islam. We lack a general understanding of even what it is, and that's what I wanted to key in on very quickly, and then I will happily come to you. We have seemingly envisioned Islam to be a religion of violence, of destruction, of negativity, perpetuated on these things. And I think that it's created a narrative that Islam and that Muslims are, like you said, are dangerous and so on. And anybody who I've talked to who's come from overseas, and I'm really glad you haven't been here, in that sense, I'm glad you haven't been here that long. I hope you plan on staying. But people who haven't been here for a very long time are people that visit. There are some students in one of my classes who are from Iceland. And they said the same thing. They said, it's so strange here that we come here. And I was talking to them about how they view our domestic politics. The first thing that he said was, I don't understand why you guys think that all Muslims are violent and are terrible people and all these things. I'm going to go here first, and then I'll come back to you. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's not that all Muslims are violent. It's that most of the extremists with the jihadists.
Sure.
But, just wanted to touch on the Constitution and that's the foundation of this country. If you look into it, if I'm not mistaken, the Constitution is also based off of the biblical teachings or commandments, right?
Kind of.
Kind of.
But not really, but kind of, but not really. This is an incredibly, this actually highlights one of the other things. And again, to bring it full circle, we're talking about why the U.S. cares about the Middle East. One of the functional problems, again, that I think that we have is how we envision ourselves as a country. And there's been a narrative that's been perpetuated since the beginning, and it's changed in a variety of different ways over and over, that the United States is a Christian nation, that the United States is based on Christianity, based on, they call it Judeo-Christian, a Judeo-Christian foundation. If you talk to Professor Orrin Steer here from FIU, he's incredibly well-respected in the field, a brilliant guy. He will yell at you for hours about how there's no such thing as Judeo-Christian, there is Jewish and there is Christian, and we have to stop saying this, and it's a convenient phrase, and he's a great guy, and he would love to talk to you about this. But that's, what you're saying is exactly part of it. And I think both of you guys have summed it up quite nicely. If we are concerned about our values in America, and if we are concerned about how our values might translate for the betterment of other people in other places, it brings us back to the question, but what really are our values? What do we really believe? What is it that is so important to us that we go and fight wars in other countries and so on? The irony about what you said about viewing Islam as an extremists in Islam, jihadists, as being, right, jihadists as being dangerous. But of course they are. Right, the extremist is, I don't think that the negativity about Islam that has matriculated down from the jihadists and from Islamists and from that violent sect hasn't translated down the same way it has in violence in Christianity, has it? The largest domestic terror attack in terms of loss of life in the United States until 9/11 was what? Does anyone remember? Say again? No, after that. It was Timothy McVeigh in the Oklahoma City bombing. And Timothy McVeigh would tell anyone who listened that he was doing God's work, that he was the Christian hand of God. That was the name of the organization he created, him and 3 of his cohorts. And he said that he wanted to bring attention to America's veterans who weren't being paid attention to enough coming back from the war, that he wanted to remind everyone of the importance of Christianity in our culture. There's a whole book that a couple of religious scholars got together and wrote, who interviewed Timothy McVeigh before he was executed for killing over 100 women and children in the Oklahoma City building. Because really the only people that were left there was it was a daycare. There was a daycare that was open, and it was women, children, and a few janitors. So I understand your point, I think. But all I'm saying is that I think that it's strange how 9/11 has led many people, not you, I don't think, but has led many people to view Islam on the whole as being, at the very least, sympathetic, and at the worst, complicit in violence. And that's why we have to go in the Middle East. But other religions and other faiths, even Hinduism, which we know has had it, like any religion, has had issues with violence in the past, has violence with issues now. We don't seem to view them the same way, do we? I'm going to go here, and then I'm going to go here. I see you waving. Go ahead.
Do you believe it's just a phase of corruption that the religion as a whole is going through? Because every religion that I've seen through history goes through a phase of corruption. And I'm multiracial, and half my family's from Lebanon. They were Catholics, and they moved out into Cuba. And I've seen, in the Middle Ages, the Catholic religion was very, very corrupt during the Renaissance and back into the Crusades. And I think now that the Muslim religion is going through that same sort of phase, now that the Catholic religion sort of went through right now. Do you think it's sort of like that?
When you say it, in the beginning you said it, do you mean Islam?
Yes, as the Islamic religion. Because
in what way?
Through the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad through his life, that what he's doing is supposed to be for peaceful purposes. And what I see going on here in what now is going on in the Middle East, I think it's more of a Middle East thing, because Indonesia has a lot of Muslims, and if they don't start rioting on the streets because of a movie. And I saw the movie. This is nothing to be writing about at all.
Well, again, I don't know, because I'm not Muslim. I don't know how it would affect me to see that movie. What I do know is that in the Philippines, and which has ties in with Indonesia, Abu Sayyaf group, Jamaat Islamiyah, terrorist organizations that are violent, behead people, kidnappings, those kind of things. The U.S. worked with those respective governments to weed out those extremists because they were being supported by Al-Qaeda in the mid-2000s. To your question about is Islam going through a stage of corruption stuff, I don't want to speak to that only because I don't have the time to speak to that. But I do think that that's part of the narrative and part of the things that people are concerned about why we should be in the Middle East, is to stem the possible fallout of violence that may eventually perpetuate itself back to the United States like 9/11. That's certainly a big piece of the pie. Yes, go ahead. I know you've been waiting. I'm sorry.
I think it all comes down to the fact that in the Middle East, they view the U.S. and the Western world with a certain stereotype, and in the Western world, people view the Middle East, Muslims in the Middle East, with a certain stereotype. So if everyone, well, as they think in the Middle East, everyone here is thinking, okay, they're all violent and they're stupid and all of that, then if they're thinking, okay, everybody here is thinking that, then they're going to retaliate. But in reality and in truth, it's not like that. Everybody here isn't saying, okay, all Muslims are violent. We just recognize that, yes, there's a certain faction of that religion that are extremists and they are violent, but the religion on a whole is violent. But over there in the Middle East, they're thinking that everyone in the West is thinking, okay, we're all violent, we're stupid, or Prophet is stupid, they're disrespecting all of us. So I think that's where the conflict comes in.
Sure. And I want to go back to what you guys said about ignorance. This is one of my talking points, is that there seems to be a lack of a genuine, open discourse on our side of the water and across the pond, both in the Middle East, in Europe, across the world. There's a lack of ability to have a genuine discourse about what's going on. And the biggest reason why, of course, is politics. Because it's not always convenient to say what's actually happening, is it? It's not always politically convenient to talk about the truth. During the political conventions, we found this out. It's not always convenient to say what really happened. Former President Clinton was lauded for his speech and for being honest and for him quoting facts that were fact-checked and being honest and all these things. And then there was some fudging there too. At the same time, Vice President nominee Ryan Paul, Sorry, I just said his name backwards. Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan definitely got in some trouble for blaming the president for a factory closing that closed during the Bush campaign, or during the Bush years, rather. So it's not always convenient. What I put up here is that there's if we can agree that culturally that we have issues, that culturally there are issues in other communities with seeing the other side in a fair and unbiased way, we're seeing the same thing in other places. In Lebanon this week, 2 days ago, they welcomed Pope Benedict for a week to kind of be promoting peace and to be doing these things. And the first picture is of banners that Hezbollah, which is listed by the United States and many other countries as a terrorist organization, Hezbollah put up these posters and all these signages and billboards that said in both French and in Arabic, we welcome the Pope to the land of peace and tolerance. And then in the back alleys and in the side streets away from the airport, they were taking down those signs and putting up ones that said, "We welcome the Pope to the land of resistance." Now the thing is that we would look at that and say, "Oh, see, there they go again," and we would have that commentary. But it's really not about whether or not Hezbollah actually thinks anything negative about the Pope or it's anything like that. They have to pander to their audience, don't they? Like I said before, we go back to it's about language. They have to tell their supporters, the kind of hardliners that support them, that give them money, that vote for them, that put them in power. They have to tell those people, hey, we're the land of resistance. Don't worry, we're not really the land of tolerance and peace. At the same time, of course, peace and stability is good. Peace and stability is good for the economy. It's good for not dying. I know that sounds self-evident, but I think we might have forgotten that when there's peace and stability, we're less likely to be killing each other. You're less likely to see your sons, your daughters, your brothers, your sisters have to go off and fight. And the obvious outcome of fighting, one possibility, is death. Stability is good, but it's hard to have that when you have to pander across both sides. And I think we were talking about with Israel and with the Israel lobby and those things, it's hard to disconnect what might be a good policy choice with what we feel compelled to do because of our culture and values and what we've decided as a community. So I ask you guys, if we can agree it's not just about Israel and Iran, and we haven't really, and sadly we don't quite have enough time, and we probably should have, to really touch on, to talk about in depth Iran, because I can promise you, having talked to people that I know at State Department, having had some of those conversations, the issue with Iran is only going to escalate and get worse before it gets better. And there's a lot of concerns there, and it's not about whether Iran is good or bad or what they're doing is good or bad. I'm not making a value judgment. I'm merely saying the politics are only going to get worse, and it's going to be very conflictive. And I'll get to you in a second, Randy. But if we agree it's not just about Israel and Iran and our special relationship with Israel and the issues with Iran, and if we agree it's not just about oil and energy, because we talked about it at the beginning, and then we've spent now about a good half an hour talking about identity and culture and politics. But if we agree it's also not just about humanitarian things, and it's not just about the American self-image and the community and the culture. What is it about then, if it's not just about these things? I was going to have a funny picture of like a cat meme, or like something like a cat with its head in a piece of toast, or like stuck in a jar or something, as the next slide to kind of liven things up. But then I wasn't really sure if that was a good idea, and then I got distracted because I couldn't find a good cat meme, because there was so many to choose from, I didn't know which ones you guys would like, and then a picture of Charlie Sheen popped up, and it got very strange. But if we're talking about, if it's not just any one of these things primarily, if that's not the priority, then what is it? What is the thing that is driving American policy? All of these. And more, right? It's probably all of these things. It's probably more of these things. It's probably things we haven't even talked. There's probably stuff you guys have thought of while we're sitting here. There's certainly things that are on the State Department's list. Say again? Deeper things that are even deeper than our relationship with Israel, the presumptive capacity of war, nuclear war with Iran, oil and energy resources, access to economic markets, and the future of our economy, humanitarian intervention, and how we see our community and values and America's self-image. There's probably deeper stuff than that. So, we could spend a whole nother hour. We could stop here, break, eat more of the university's food. And we could come back and we could talk for another hour, another 10 hours, the rest of the week, about what the policy prescription should be, about what we should do. that's probably not actually going to solve anything because of what you guys have talked about today, which is that fundamentally there really seems to be a disconnect between what's actually happening, what's actually going on the ground, how people actually feel, and what we think is happening and what we think we should do because of it. It's a very strange reality and a very strange thing that's happening here. I'm going to backtrack for the last 5 minutes and let you guys kind of if there's anything you want to say conclusively, keep it a bit short. I know Randy wants to say something, you want to say something. Anybody else who hasn't said anything yet wants to throw in their 2 cents? You guys are here, you're thinking people. Sure, what's your name?
Brian Suarez.
Say again?
Brian Suarez.
Oh, Mr. Suarez.
I was thinking earlier about Israel and like the Arab nations. Like, it's not just that we're just biased on the side of Israel, but like Israel is more or less kinder to America, while other nations have gone on riot, protest, fought against American ways. So oftentimes it becomes difficult when they're being nice and they're not cooperating easily.
Couldn't agree more. But what I think, this is what we do as well. And I can tell you from being in DC, I can tell you from policy circles, what you just said is the exact kind of thing, the conversations that get had, and it's a logical fallacy. It's a naturalistic fallacy. It's looking at what is and defining from what is what ought to be. There are protests in the Middle East. That's what is happening against the United States. Therefore, what we ought to do is to not be friendly. It makes it difficult to be friendly. But what does that ignore? And I know that you guys can figure this out. What is being left out of this conversation right now? What? we all could use some lessons in friendship. I think yes, go ahead. That it's a two-way street. That these protests, these rallies, these riots against what's perceived to is against what is perceived to be something that has been ingrained and indoctrinated and perpetuated in the Middle East, which is that we're not very friendly to the Middle East. So it becomes a chicken and egg thing, doesn't it? Who came first? Who was the mean guy first? And it's almost gotten to the point now, just like say you're having an argument with your brother or your sister, and you're mad at them for weeks. It gets to the point you don't even remember why you're mad. You don't even know why you're mad anymore. And that's the thing, is that we've kind of lost some of that, I think. We've lost who started it, why that even matters, and we focus so on the outcomes, the results, instead of what we should do. Yeah?
I got one more question. So who has the answers for that question? It should be the U.S. government has to have a clear answer for that question.
Well, the U.S.
And also,
yeah.
The second part is some terrorist organizations, they announce and say, on TV, online, on radio, that we're not going to attack the United States or Europe if one condition, if you guys withdraw all your military out of our land, you guys are never going to see any bombs. You're going to see any jihadi anywhere in the world. Withdraw troops out, take over.
Now, when you see, this is the thing, I want to focus on that. Al-Qaeda, there's a great book that was just written, that was edited by one of our peers here at FIU. Al-Qaeda said that there were two real reasons why Al-Qaeda under Osama bin Laden said that there were two big reasons why they did what they did, for lack of a better phrase. The biggest thing was that they said that the U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia. It was U.S. troops in the Holy Land. It was U.S. troops in the holiest place in Islam. It was infidels, outsiders being allowed in. That was one of the biggest things that they said. It was very localized. It was a very small thing. It wasn't this whole idea that Al-Qaeda started out saying we are against America and all this other stuff. That's a very bloated kind of sense of things. The top leadership in Al-Qaeda said over and over, it's the U.S. It's outsiders in our holy land. And so when we think about it in that context, when you put it in that context, it kind of changes things, doesn't it? And it comes to kind of what you said. Okay, well then why don't we just pull our troops out and be done with it? Why don't we just leave Saudi Arabia? But now obviously we're too far gone. We're too far past that point.
Why couldn't they negotiate?
Well, we don't negotiate with terrorists.
But, okay, so that means that we had a reason to be there in the first place.
Well, the Saudi Arabian, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia invited us to be there. They invited us to come because they couldn't control. There's a whole length of things that happen here, and we're talking during the Kuwait War. There's a whole slew of things that happen that's very complicated. But to kind of distill it down, and I think on my part a bit disingenuously, it became a thing where it kind of spiraled, where the U.S., Saudi Arabia asked the U.S. to come in during the Kuwait War to help secure the territory because they couldn't do it themselves, and it kind of perpetuated and snowballed, and we just ended up setting up a base there, and it spiraled out of control. But now it's not so simple as we can just pull our troops out. So I'll ask you guys in closing, because we're already over time, as every class that you'll have with a pandering lecturer like me does. You said, who has the answers? Do you guys think that there's an answer? So I guess we'll straw poll it. Do you guys think that there's a way to solve the issues in the Middle East? Show of hands. How about a yes? We can solve it. How about no? How about it's a hell of a lot more complicated than that? Yeah. I mean, I'm in that boat as well. If you can't tell by I'm indecisive about which cat meme I should put up as a picture. The problem is that if you talk genuinely and openly and after about 5 drinks with any of the people who work at State Department, with a lot of people that work for the National Security Council in the lower tiers, because the upper tier ones, of course, don't drink, what you'll find is that there's a very sincere feeling that we just don't know. It's so complicated. And there's so many moving parts. And it's so difficult that we're just not sure what we should do moving forward. We're not sure what the prescription is to solve the problem. I think personally, and in 20 seconds or less, my 2 cents, the idea that we think that there's something that needs to be solved is the actual problem. We have realized ourselves as America as being it's so essential that we give democracy, the gift of democracy, to everyone else. That we, whether it's for benign, wonderful purposes of humanitarianism, or if it's for more realist, theoretical purposes of saying we want to open their markets for our economies and our businesses, whichever side of the fence you're on, the idea that we think that there's something to solve is in and of itself part of the problem. And 9/11 didn't change. It didn't really change. You had talked to people at State Department. It didn't change very much. It just made things worse. It didn't necessarily change any of the things that, sure, it changed some of our strategic goals and so on. 9/11 didn't change much of what the U.S. was already doing as the sole power after the Cold War. It's just made things a lot more complicated now. So in that, I guess I'll close there. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you again to the department and for Global Learning for having us. Every Tuesday, feel free to come back. Anyone else, I'd love to meet with you afterwards. If you'd like to chat for a few minutes, make sure to take any food if there's any left. And have a great day. Enjoy the rest of it.
Thank you to you, Charles.